Hi, welcome back to Finally Revealed. In this episode, I want to talk about some areas, 8 to be specific, in a lease, either of an apartment, a condo, or a house, but for residential lease, that you may want to negotiate or modify in the actual lease. In any event, check these areas if any of these issues may apply to you. The point of this is to, beyond my other video where I talk about what's in a lease and how to read it, this is tailoring it to you. And that's really what negotiating and modifying contracts is to tailor it to the particular people involved or companies and the situation. So let's get started. The first item I want you to check on may seem counterintuitive, but it's a sublease. And you may say, I'm entering into this lease. For me, this is not for someone else. I'm not going to turn around and leave. But you don't know that. I have another video where I talk about a sublease and information particular to people in college and who are going to be away, and go into it a little bit more in depth. But here I want you to check and see, is a sublease available? Is it already provided for in the lease that you can or can't sublease? It's information that you should have. Then further, if there is a provision for it, does the landlord request or require approval of who you sublease it to? And a sublease is letting someone else take over the lease for you and enjoy the benefits and the obligations. So they would have the space and pay the rent. I would recommend that they pay the rent to you and you make sure it gets to the landlord, but you can work that out however works best for you. So you want to know, is it allowed? If it's allowed, what kinds of information is the landlord going to require that you provide? In other words, does the landlord have to pre-approve or approve who you're going to sublease it to? And then what types of information is it that they want? And when do you have to provide it? How far in advance? So that's sublease, number one. Number two is the term. Now, a lease is going to have a term which tells you when it starts, when it ends, how long you have possession. It should also tell you when you need to notify the landlord that you're leaving and how the condition of the property should be when you do leave. Now here I want to talk about the term and look at it and see if there's any provision in there for you to get out early. If there isn't, and it's possible that you may be transferred, it's possible that you're either transferred with your employer, say you've just taken a job and you're signing this lease in this location because this is where your job is. However, your company has opportunities for you, but you might have to move to another city. In that situation, would your landlord let you out? Sometimes they will say yes. So if you build this into the lease at the beginning and think about the possible reasons you may want to get out of your lease or break your lease, and they don't involve just moving across town or to a better place or moving in with your girlfriend or something like that, but actually leaving the area, you're going to be more likely to get their agreement. So if that's a possibility, check the lease. If there's not a provision for it in there, ask for it to be added in. The other thing about a term is, do you like the general area that the place is? Do you like the condo, the house, the apartment, and it seems to fit your needs? And are you going to be at this job or in this school for a period of time? If so, and if the terms of the lease as far as the payment, what you have to pay and what you get for that, if that is a pretty good deal, you may want to go ahead and ask for your term to be longer. Oftentimes the landlords will have set lease documents that they use, whether it's a small fourplex or if it's a big apartment complex, and often those are 6, 9, 12 months. That's all right that that's their form lease, but if your needs are beyond that, and if you can lock in a good rate, then lock in more time and extend that term. So check that out if that's something that might work for you. The next thing is pets. Do you have a pet now? Maybe not. Does the lease allow for pets? You might want to get a pet later. Does it allow for the type that you think you have? If you have Labrador retrievers, you're going to need somebody place that allows big dogs if that's what you think, if that's what you're going to want. So check the lease and look for pets, pet deposits, pet size, either I think that it would be weight. I don't think they would say big or small, but they would go by weight. Pet deposits, and if there is a renewal, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, is the renewal going to include an increase in the pet deposit, or can you modify the pet deposit after a period of time? So if you have a pet, you need to make sure it's allowed. If you think you might get one during the term of your lease, see if it's allowed. If it's not, ask to have it added. And similar to pets, some people's roommates might be like pets, but roommates. Are roommates allowed? How many people, in other words, how many people can occupy this space with you? If you're married and you've got kids and it's a 3-bedroom place, it's probably a given. And in most residential situations, your immediate family is allowed. That's understood. It's not like a hotel room where you're going to have to add in a rollaway bed and add for another person. But if you are going to have roommates, is that allowed? In some places, for some colleges now, the landlords modify it and they let each individual person, say if you have 4 or 5 people in a house, they will separate out the rent or divide it up between the 4 or 5 people, so those 4 or 5 people pay the landlord directly and one person doesn't have to be responsible. If you're going to sign a lease and get a place and it's big enough and it's nice enough that you think you can attract others to come in and pay part of the rent, check the lease and see if that's allowed. Check the lease and see what kind of notice you might have to give. Would that be considered a sublease? And most likely, when there's a sublease, when there's a roommate, the person who signs that lease is not going to get off the hook until the lease is over. Either it's been assigned to someone or it's been terminated. So you should count on the default provision being, so you should count on being held responsible for paying all of the rent for the whole term as long as that lease is effective. Anything other than that would be a modification. So check it and see what the provisions are for roommates, and if that landlord requires it, then you need to get your people and everybody sign off at the beginning, or if you're going to add people on, then the landlord allows them to sign later. Make sure they actually sign that lease, and then everybody's in it together. I hope that wasn't too confusing. The next one is renewal. Is the lease subject to being renewed? So maybe they say, we won't do a 3-year term now or a 2-year term. It's 1 year, but we'll allow it to be renewed. Great. What is the time frame that you have to give them notice that you intend to renew it? When do you have to give them notice if you don't want to renew it and you're going to move? Is the lease amount, the rent, specified for the renewal, either that it's going to be plus a certain amount of dollars or minus a certain amount of dollars or a percentage? If you can lock in what the renewal fee is or the renewal rent is and you're experiencing a pretty low rental rate at that time, do it. If you're paying a high rent and there is newer construction around and more places are going to be available, then your rent for your older place, even though it might be brand new now, but if there are newer places coming on, your rent then actually might go down later. So in that situation, you would not want to lock it in. So consider that. And then finally, utilities. Oh, not finally, I have 2 more. Utilities. Are utilities covered and included in the lease? What are the utilities for that unit, that building, that house? What are they? And should you include utilities as part of the lease so that you just pay rent and included in your rent it covers utilities? That may or may not be a good deal depending upon what the actual cost of utilities is. So investigate that and act accordingly, if find out. And then finally, the return of the security deposit. Now I have a whole other video on how to get that back and what steps to take and things I recommend at the beginning of the lease. So watch that separately. I don't want to repeat that here. But for here, when you're looking at the lease at the beginning, does it provide for when the security deposit will be returned and how that determination will be made? Is there a period of time that's specified in the lease? Is there some notice that you give? Is there notice that they're going to give back to you? Look for that. It's way better. It's much better to have these things hammered out at the beginning when everyone's being nice than it is to be fighting about it later. And you get some certainty that way, because if you've moved away, you don't want to have to be going back and dealing with give me my security deposit back please, especially if you've moved out of state. So I hope that is helpful. Hope it all makes sense. If you have any questions for me, leave them below. Watch the other videos on the apartment leases and on the security deposit. And I have another one on the sublease. And thanks for all the likes and subscribes and shares. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.